Mary, could you really be in this town?
I'm a huge fan of the Silent Hill franchise, with Silent Hill 2 being a particular standout in the series for myself and many others. From the mainline games themselves to the spin-off titles, big screen adaptations, however objectively awful they may have been as films, to the crossover events, merchandise, both official and unofficial, fan art, cosplays, and overall community surrounding this franchise. I love it all. I love being able to engage with this community of fans on so many levels across so many different mediums and contribute to it here with my own video. But I wouldn't be here making this video had I not been inspired by so many others in their creations. So if you'll indulge me, I'd like to show off some of the Silent Hill things in my collection and put a spotlight on the creators' Etsy shops, as well as some of the other artists and Silent Hill content creators that I follow. All of these will be linked in the description below, so please go support other members of this community if you have the means to. In this video, aptly titled A Letter for Silent Heaven, I'd like to take a look at Silent Hill 2 in its entirety, both the main game and additional campaign, as well as briefly look at the options for playing the game, including the HD collection, and finally discuss the upcoming Silent Hill 2 remake being developed by Bloober Team that is expected to release sometime within the next year or so at the time of writing. While I may end up retreading some of the same ground you have seen covered in other videos on this topic, it's my sincerest hope that I can bring my own voice to the conversation and use this as an opportunity to fully dissect a game that I unreservedly love and illustrate to anyone watching why they should too. As always, there will be video chapters available for you to skip around and watch different sections if some things interest you more than others. With the intro out of the way, let's write that letter for Silent Hill 2. Booting up and playing Silent Hill 2 for the first time ever is an experience that will always stick with me. The opening song and accompanying visuals are burned into my memory in a way that no other game has been capable of doing, not to the same degree or even remotely in the same fashion. Stepping into town for the first time, just on the edge of Toluca Lake, taking everything in. Knowing that this is going to be the last normal thing you see for the duration of your visit to Silent Hill is simultaneously breathtaking and nerve-wracking. From a distance, the town is a sight to behold, in spite of all the fog. But what will happen when we get up close? There are plenty of horror games nowadays, but there is nothing quite like Silent Hill 2. Modern horror has never instilled this same sense of trepidation in me, and I believe there is a hole in the market that can only be filled by horror games of the same caliber as those found in the 6th generation of consoles, with Silent Hill 2 leading the pack even in a crowd of genuinely fantastic games from that era, such as Rule of Rose, Haunting Ground, and many others. If you're new to this title, I'll give you a brief introduction to the story. We play as James Sunderland, just your average Joe type of guy who has been brought to Silent Hill by a letter from his wife, Mary, telling him to come meet her in their special place. The one caveat being Mary has been dead for 3 years. This leads James to explore the desolate town, encountering a handful of other people as well as monsters that have been pulled from deep within his own psyche. Silent Hill 2 does something really interesting with its story, though, in comparison to its contemporaries. Where games like Resident Evil would have the big bad biohazard threat and the Corporation of Umbrella as the focal point, not quite giving the characters a ton of room to breathe, Silent Hill 2 has an unwavering commitment to its characters. Yes, there is an overarching plot regarding Mary's death, but there is no central main bad guy to steal the attention away from the cast of characters we interact with. So I'm going to examine the characters themselves, talk about their backstories, and what makes them such integral parts of the bigger story at play. First, let's take a look at Eddie, who we first meet in the Blue Creek apartment buildings. He's a young guy on the heavier side and entirely disheveled in his appearance. As we interact with him more over the course of the game, we find out that Eddie was bullied and abused both in high school and afterwards. His coping mechanism is food, and we'll often see him eating excessively during interactions. There is quite a bit of symbolism that signals this eating disorder as well, with my favorite example being the body stuffed haphazardly into a refrigerator in the room just prior to meeting him. Eddie is called to the town after he kills one of his bully's dogs and maims the bully in the process. He doesn't quite seem to know if he's on the run from the police or not, but as we progress further and meet up with him more, he adopts a more violent demeanor. Ultimately, Eddie turns on James too, believing him to be no better than the bullies he's faced his entire life, refusing to accept the consequences for what he had done to his bully before arriving in town, leading to a boss fight where we are forced to kill him.
Eddie? What are you doing?
What does it look like? He always busted my balls. You fat, disgusting piece of shit. You make me sick. Fat ass, you're nothing but a waste of skin. You're so ugly, even your mama don't love you. Well, maybe he was right. Maybe I am nothing but a fat, disgusting piece of shit. But you know what? It doesn't matter if you're smart, dumb, ugly, pretty. It's all the same once you're dead. And the corpse can't laugh. From now on, if anyone makes fun of me, I'll kill him. Just like that.
Eddie, have you gone nuts? I knew it.
You too. You're just like him, James.
Hey, I didn't mean anything.
Don't bother. I understand. You've been laughing at me all along, haven't you? Ever since we first met. I'll kill you, James!
Angela is my favorite character in the game, and before I say anything else, I believe her character and story are written with an incredible attention to detail and respect not often found in writing surrounding the topics we're about to delve into now. She was a victim of physical, mental, and sexual abuse for years at the hands of her father and brother. Prior to arriving in Silent Hill, she murdered both of them and fled in the middle of the night. When we first meet her in the cemetery outside of town, she is visibly reserved, but still tries to help James despite everything that's happened to her, warning him of the dangers ahead. In the same conversation, we also learn that she is searching for her mother, who left Angela's family years ago and may not even be alive. Her background, much like Eddie's, perfectly informs her character design, with her sweater and pants intended to cover up as much of her body as possible. When we meet her again in the apartments, she's seen holding a knife, staring into her reflection in the blade and in the mirror on the wall, clearly contemplative. After a brief conversation, she asks James to hold onto the knife, unsure of what she would do if she kept it. When James goes to reach for the knife, however, Angela physically reacts, thinking James was trying to attack her. She leaves the knife on a table in front of him and runs away. The reveal of her story is paced well, and nothing is outright explained to the player. We have to interpret what we're seeing for ourselves. We don't get an explanation from Angela about why she thought he was going to attack her, and we don't need one. There is nuance and subtlety present here where many other developers would fail spectacularly were they to write about these sensitive subjects. We'll run into Angela at several other points in the game, each scene underlined with her continued battle with her depression and trauma. After a boss fight with an enemy named Abstract Daddy, we see Angela directly confronting the source of her trauma. The ensuing scene shows the toll that everything has taken on her, and that even if she wanted to trust James, shown by her asking for his help to hold the knife earlier in the game, she simply can't. This all comes to a head in Angela's final scene, which I'm going to let play out here.
I was looking for you. Now you're the only one left. Maybe then I can rest. Mama, why are you running away? You're not my mama. It's you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Angela, no.
Thank you for saving me. But I wish you hadn't. Even Mama said it. I deserved what happened.
No, Angela, that's wrong.
No, don't pity me. I'm not worth it. Or maybe you think you can save me. Will you love me? Take care of me? Heal all my pain? That's what I thought. James, give me back that knife.
No, I won't.
Saving it for yourself?
Me? No, I'd never kill myself. It's hot as hell in here.
You see it too. For me, it's always like this.
While the previous two characters are adults, Laura is just a little girl who found herself brought to the town. Interestingly, she doesn't see any monsters in the town, and rather spends her time exploring and causing mild inconveniences for James, such as kicking a key out of his reach, running off into the town, forcing him to go and find her to learn more about Mary, etc. According to herself, Laura was in the same hospital as Mary when she was sick, and the two would often find themselves spending lots of time together. By the time Mary passed away, she had even given Laura a letter stating she loved her and would have wanted to adopt her had things gone differently. What I love about all three of these characters is that they could easily be seen as representations of the options laid out before James upon reaching the penultimate point in his journey, with Eddie being the rebirth ending, in which James refuses to accept the consequences of his actions and attempts to bring Mary back to life through a ritual. Angela represents the in-water ending, wherein James comes to terms with what he did and believes his only option is to drive into Toluca Lake to be with Mary again. And finally, Laura, who represents the leave ending, where James acknowledges what he did to Mary, and by her request, he forgives himself, leaving the town and continuing to live. However, we're not done with the characters of Silent Hill 2 just yet. Unlike the previous three characters, Maria isn't technically a human. She's a manifestation of James's inner desires brought to life by the town to try and coax him down the path to one of the bad endings. But between the main campaign and the additional story scenario born from a wish, Maria's character is able to achieve something that Silent Hill 1 could only hint at with Lisa Garland. In Silent Hill 1, Lisa was a creation of the town much like Maria, and we watch in abject horror as the realization quite literally kills her. She is not like the other monsters in the town. She is alive in a way that they aren't. She's conscious, bordering on human. When she dies, she's afraid, asking Harry to stay with her in her final moments. But we never get to see what things were like directly from her perspective. which is where Silent Hill 2 steps in with Maria's story. While there are still monsters to fight in the town to keep in line with the gameplay of the main campaign, the real fear in this story comes from the horror of questioning one's own existence as Maria does. Watching her grapple with the idea that, although she believed herself to be real, she is exactly as the title implies, having been born from a wish. Seeing Maria as a character explored like this in a piece of side content makes her feel more well-realized than had we just seen her the way we did during the main story of the game. But, as we're about to see, Silent Hill 2's characters are so well written that we don't even need to interact with them in the game for them to hold significance. While we never directly meet Mary in the game, Silent Hill 2 makes a point to expound her character to where we didn't need to meet her in order for her to feel as real and important as any of the other characters. There are several points, especially towards the end of the game, where players hear audio clips of conversations between Mary and James. You hear her struggling with her illness, lashing out at James, apologizing to him, coming to terms with her own mortality.
Mary?
What do you want, James?
I brought you some flowers.
Flowers? I don't want any damn flowers. Just go home already.
Mary, what are you saying?
Look, I'm disgusting. I don't deserve flowers. Between the disease and the drugs, I look like a monster. Well, what are you looking at? Get the hell out of here! Leave me alone already! I'm no use to anyone. I'll be dead soon anyway. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. It'd be easier if they'd just kill me. But I guess the hospital is making a nice profit off me. They want to keep me alive. Are you still here? I told you to go! Are you deaf? Don't come back! James! Wait! Please don't go! Stay with me! Don't leave me alone! I didn't mean what I said. Please, James. Tell me I'll be okay. Tell me I'm not going to die. Help me.
It is thoroughly heartbreaking to witness watching this illness consume everything about her life, driving a rift between her and James, the person she needed the most support from in all of this. But her illness is not her only character trait. She's not just a MacGuffin, some plot device to be used for one purpose and nothing more. James carries a photo of her in his inventory to view whenever the player wants. This serves no gameplay purpose, but shows that she is a real person in the context of this world. Mary was happy, she was healthy, and she and James were living a life together. So we get to see a progression from that healthy state all the way to those scenes near the end. This is capped off with a reading of Mary's letter in full, playing over whichever ending of the game you received. Mary's letter encapsulates Silent Hill 2's commitment to character, and because of that, I'd like to let you hear it for yourself right now.
In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill. You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did. Well, I'm alone there now, in our special place, waiting for you. Waiting for you to come to see me. But you never do. And so I wait, wrapped in my cocoon of pain and loneliness. I know I've done a terrible thing to you. Something you'll never forgive me for. I wish I could change that. But I can't. I feel so pathetic and ugly laying here, waiting for you. Every day I stare up at the cracks in the ceiling, and all I can think about is how unfair it all is. The doctor came today. He told me I could go home for a short stay. It's not that I'm getting better. It's just that this may be my last chance. I think you know what I mean. Even so, I'm glad to be coming home. I've missed you terribly. But I'm afraid, James. I'm afraid you don't really want me to come home. Whenever you come see me, I can tell how hard it is on you. I don't know if you hate me or pity me, or maybe I just disgust you. I'm sorry about that. When I first learned that I was going to die, I just didn't want to accept it. I was so angry all the time, and I struck out at everyone I loved most. Especially you, James. That's why I understand if you do hate me. But I want you to know this, James. I'll always love you. Even though our life together had to end like this, I still wouldn't trade it for the world. We had some wonderful years together. Well, this letter has gone on too long, so I'll say goodbye. I told the nurse to give this to you after I'm gone. That means that as you read this, I'm already dead. I can't tell you to remember me, but I can't bear for you to forget me. These last few years since I became ill, I am so sorry for what I did to you, did to us. You've given me so much, and I haven't been able to return a single thing. That's why I want you to live for yourself now. Do what's best for you, James. James, you made me happy.
It's through all of these characters that we get to learn about who James is as a person. Watching his interactions with all of them, seeing how he reacts to situations, and hearing about what he was like prior to and during Mary's illness, on top of getting to see how he acts after killing her. Because the monster designs are pulled directly from James's mind, it culminates in this fantastic relationship between all of the elements of the game, where the story affects James, who informs the enemy design, which impacts the gameplay. And I have yet to mention the iconic design of Pyramid Head, who is James's guilt personified. Letting players not only see James struggle with his guilt in the story, but have us actively struggle with that guilt too by engaging with it in the gameplay via the Pyramid Head boss fights. Speaking of the gameplay, let's dive into that now. The gameplay of Silent Hill 2 is survival horror perfected. I could sit here and explain to you the intricacies of what the survival horror genre is, but chances are you have a decent idea even if you haven't played any of the games from this era. The recent Resident Evil remakes are a fantastic example of what modern survival horror can look like, and it's something that I hope the Silent Hill 2 remake borrows from, at least to a certain degree. Across all pillars of what makes survival horror what it is, those being exploration, combat, puzzle solving, and resource management, Silent Hill 2 expertly and effortlessly weaves each one in between another. Each of these gameplay mechanics are handled incredibly well on their own, but where I believe Silent Hill 2 really pulls ahead of other games is in the pacing of their introduction. When you first begin playing, you're only really faced with exploration. You have no weapons, there aren't any puzzles yet, and you don't have any resources to manage. You're introduced to more as you play further, one pillar at a time, as you come to grips with the expanding gameplay loop. So you make your way into town, walking down the creepy wooded path, hearing the sounds of monsters you've yet to face. You learn what save points look like in the environment, you get acquainted with the different audiovisual cues the game is going to use to subtly direct you to points of interest. And none of this is spelled out with objective notifications, waypoints on the screen, or a mini-map to follow along with. It's a perfectly paced introduction to the first major pillar of gameplay that you're about to spend the rest of your experience engaging with. But as you've just gotten comfortable with what it means to explore the town, you're facing down a lying figure, one of the numerous enemy types in Silent Hill. The introduction to combat is accompanied by a wonderfully shot cutscene that emphasizes how truly grotesque the creature in front of you is. James picks up a wooden plank, and you're allowed to start wailing on the monster. In this one encounter alone, you see the timing of enemy attacks, you learn how to dish your own, how to block, and how to finish a downed enemy. Without knowing any of the other enemy types that will pop up later on, you have a combat encounter that teaches you the basics you'll be using to survive for the whole game. You'll pick up more weapons as the game goes on, both melee and firearms, but the basic loop remains the same. And then the game starts to mix these two things together. You have to get back to exploring the town, which is now filled with lying figures and many other monster types hiding everywhere. They may be walking around in the open, only hidden by the fog that spills from street to street across the entire town. Or they could be hiding around corners waiting to attack you until a camera angle snaps into place. They could jump in from the edge of the screen in larger groups, or they could crawl out from underneath the car. You are never truly safe in the town of Silent Hill, and the game makes no pretense of such. James is always on the back foot, and the only way he's going to survive is if he knows how to fight these creatures, or avoid them. Combat takes a two-step approach in Silent Hill 2, where players are able to sneak past enemies by turning off their flashlight and listening to the crackling of their radio to gauge their distance from enemies. This not only gives the player agency in how they approach each situation, making them feel that their choices matter, but it also creates moments of pure tension that elevates the horror part of the experience well above the competition. There's nothing quite like being low on health, knowing you don't want to get into a confrontation, and hearing your radio chirp to life. You'll switch off your flashlight, essentially blinding yourself, wandering through the streets of town, hoping you don't run directly into whatever monsters are in your vicinity. The terror of seeing nothing but a vague silhouette crawl unnaturally fast across your screen through the fog, barely missing James's leg in the process, is unmatched by any other horror game I've played to date. By this point, you've explored and fought your way to one of the main interior locations you'll need to visit throughout the game, and herein lies the introduction of puzzles. From the apartment complex to the historical society, hospital, all the way to the Lakeview Hotel, James will need to go to many locations in the town over the course of Silent Hill 2. These locations essentially act as a microcosm of the entire gameplay loop, as they're smaller locations than the whole map of the town, but you're expected to explore every nook and cranny, fight the monsters that reside within, and solve puzzles while you're there. The solutions to these puzzles will take you throughout the entirety of whatever labyrinthian structure James finds himself exploring, with pieces of the solution scattered around environments waiting to be found. The puzzles themselves can be quite tricky to decipher when playing on higher difficulties, and if needed, you can always keep the combat difficulty high and dial things down for the puzzles, but they do feel incredibly rewarding to solve without the aid of a walkthrough. Not only do they serve their gameplay purpose of splitting up the combat and exploration as a nice breather, but they offer narrative and world-building benefits as well. Many of the puzzles and pieces of the solutions hold historical value for the town, letting players progress the gameplay further while learning more about Silent Hill in the process, making it feel even more like a place that could really exist. While still in these smaller locations across the town, the final piece of the gameplay loop is introduced, that being the resource management. You're finally at a point where you know how to effectively explore, engage in both ranged and melee combat, and to solve puzzles. But now you're running low on health items and ammo. You'll need to explore these locations to find more of each, while being skilled enough at combat or stealthy enough to avoid it, that you don't burn through the resources you do have at any given moment. To add to this mechanic further, James's health over the course of the game will actually have an impact on the ending you receive. So now you're not just balancing your resource income versus expenditure in the immediate moment, but you'll always have the thought in the back of your mind that you may want to use that health item now to increase your chance of getting a better ending, even if it's your last one and you don't know when you'll find another. For example, if I spend the entire game constantly on low health, never making a point to heal up, I'm more likely to get the in-water ending in which James drives his car into Toluca Lake. It's a marriage of gameplay mechanics, player choice, and narrative payoff that makes perfect sense. If, in the gameplay, James clearly doesn't care about his own well-being, that should be reflected in the story. And it is. Now that all these pillars of gameplay have been fully introduced to the player, the rest of the game is free to shake up the kinds of scenarios it puts you in to constantly keep you on your toes. The masterfully paced introduction of these mechanics, where so many games fail by overwhelming the player with too many at once, is yet another reason that Silent Hill 2 is an exemplary showcase of the survival horror genre. Silent Hill 2 wouldn't be nearly as critically acclaimed as it is were it not for the phenomenal presentation. It's not that you can't tell that Silent Hill 2 was released over 20 years ago. It is still a product of its time. But between the graphics, sound effects, voice acting, and soundtrack, the game gets pulled together into one cohesive audiovisual experience with such a unique identity, even within its own series. Yes, in the majority of the games, you explore the town, but this is the first time that the graphics were at a level to really give the town a perceptible character. From sidewalks to storefronts, from dirt roads to dilapidated buildings, everything you see in Silent Hill feels purpose-built for the inhabitants of the town. These were all real, functional places that existed before James arrived at the start of the game, before it became the hellscape we know it as. Between the set dressing of the town all the way down to the character models themselves, everything has a striking style that is instantly recognizable. There aren't any over-the-top outfit designs like you'd find in many other survival horror games of that era. These are normal people walking around a normal town. The idea of normal people out of their element is elevated further by how audio is used in the game. While all the audio effects sound great, it's where and when the effects are placed that makes Silent Hill 2 so special. As previously discussed in the gameplay portion of the video, sound becomes a crucial tool for the player when trying to sneak around the monsters in town. Yes, the radio may be the main sound to aid in that sneaking, but you're also presented with the utterly disgusting sounds of the monsters you're trying to avoid. This serves both the purpose of giving you more audio cues to work with to discern where enemies are, but also driving up the fear factor even further. Not only that, but there are often random audio cues that will play throughout the environment, possibly even triggering as you walk into specific rooms. When revisiting the game, I've found myself still getting spooked by sounds that I know for a fact didn't appear during my last playthrough. Some of these audio cues even tie directly into the story of the game, such as this clip from the Blue Creek Apartments where the audio clip states something along the lines of, "Go see my dead wife, come home and do some laundry." This gives us just a little insight into James's own mind as we progress through the level. On top of that, as we saw earlier in the video, the voice acting performances can reach an incredibly high bar, with standouts like Monica Taylor Horgan, who was able to play both Mary and Maria while making them feel like entirely their own separate characters. Don't get me wrong, this is still the early 2000s, and the voice acting reflects that for the most part. Some lines do come off as stilted or awkward. I'm not here to tell you that the bowling alley scene isn't funny.
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?
But when the voice acting hits, it really hits. Between Mary's letter, James's realization of his actions, and Angela's final scene, among many others, there are some moments in Silent Hill 2 that will always remain a tremendous example of what video game voice acting can truly be. With all of that being said, there is only the soundtrack left to touch upon. But what is there to say about Silent Hill 2's soundtrack that hasn't already been said? There's a reason that composer Akira Yamaoka is still such a big name in the industry today, and the impact his work has had on gaming as a whole is immense. It's a bit misleading to use his name so heavily in the marketing materials of new games, hoping that people will see him as the composer and immediately believe that the entire project will be of a high quality. But that's a conversation for another day. Back to the soundtrack of Silent Hill 2, the tracks are all so memorable that even 2 decades later, watching the reveal for Silent Hill 2's remake, I knew what game it was before the screen even fully lit up. The opening notes of Magdalene were unmistakable, and the version present in the trailer gives me hope that the rest of the soundtrack will be just as beautifully re-recorded for the purposes of the remake. It's a testament to just how good the soundtrack is to elicit this kind of a response from players like myself. With some tracks mixed into the game so well they seem to emanate from the walls themselves, and others that bring emotional scenes to a crescendo without being overpowering and diverting players' focus, there isn't a single bad track present on the disc, and their implementation is nothing short of stunning. If you're considering a playthrough of Silent Hill 2, which you absolutely should, then you should try to play it in the best form you can given whatever platforms you have access to. Personally, I grew up with the PS2 version, and will always have a soft spot for it. But I don't know if that's really the best way to play anymore. For years now, I've been playing the PC version of the game using the Enhanced Edition mod. This mod, from what I understand, is still actively being worked on and is always making the game better and better. For the playthrough I did for this video, I was able to play in native 4K with full Xbox Series controller support, and it was phenomenal. The game ran incredibly smoothly without any crashes, glitches, or issues that would have otherwise encumbered the experience. Given the age of the original game, it doesn't take a supercomputer to get this running, and there are so many optimizations and fixes that have been implemented by this mod that I would argue it's the only way you should be playing this on PC if you have the means to do so. With that being said, not everyone has access to the PC version of the game, so what other options are there? You could emulate, play on the original hardware, or rely on the HD collection. I know this is a somewhat unpopular opinion among a lot of retro game fans, but I don't think emulation is a bad option in a lot of cases. If that's the best option for you to play Silent Hill 2, I'd say go for it. You can find videos here on YouTube or on online forums to help dial in the best settings for the emulator, depending on whether you're using a full-blown Windows PC, a handheld Android machine, or even something like a Steam Deck. Whatever the case may be, if you can't access a copy of the PC version of Silent Hill 2 to mod, then you still get a lot of creature comforts out of emulation, with widescreen options, high-resolution upscaling, and fairly easy controller mapping options and support. It takes some more setup than the PC version, or especially running on original hardware, but it's nothing too impossible. But let's say you're a purist, you have an older console and you want to play using all original hardware. What version of the game should you get then? There were actually a few different versions of Silent Hill 2, even back around the time it was first released. You have the original Black Label copy for PS2, which is the game in its complete original vanilla state. This version is a hot ticket item for collectors, but it actually lacks the Born from a Wish campaign, and even another ending for the game. This is where the original Xbox and PS2 Greatest Hits editions come into play. Both of these versions feature the additional episode for Maria, as well as the UFO ending. If you're looking for the most feature-complete versions of Silent Hill 2 to play, and either original hardware or emulation are your options, the Xbox port or the Greatest Hits edition for PS2 are the versions you should seek out a copy of. You could argue that these features aren't integral to the overall experience, but with a game I love as much as Silent Hill 2, I'll take as much extra content as I can get. This brings us to the HD collection, which is largely regarded as the worst possible way to play Silent Hill 2 and 3, despite being the most easily accessible versions of those games due to their availability on Xbox backwards compatibility. If you're interested in learning more about the development history of this collection and understanding exactly why things went as horribly wrong as they did, I highly encourage you to check out the What Happened episode by MattMcMuscles, which I will have linked in the description. In short, the developers themselves were hardly at fault for the state of the collection, but rather it was Konami who had failed to provide them with enough time or resources while pushing their own set of mandates on the team. However, for the purposes of this video, I'd just like to recap the differences between the original versions of Silent Hill 2 and the version that appears in the HD collection, to emphasize why it is ultimately inferior, and given other options to play the game, it should be avoided if possible. First and foremost is the change in voice actors, which for Silent Hill 2 is a toggle that can be changed, thankfully, although this isn't the case for the version of Silent Hill 3 in the collection. For the sake of argument, the new voice acting simply doesn't hold a candle to the original version. It changes the overall tone of conversations between characters, with different voice inflections that could even shift players' perception and understanding of what's being said. This may be personal taste, but I also don't feel that the new voices fit the characters on screen. When I look at James Sunderland, I don't imagine him sounding like Troy Baker, voice actor extraordinaire. I think he should sound like just some dude, because that's who he is. I won't harp on this point any longer, as this can be remedied by sticking with the original voice lines, but the other differences do not have simple fixes like that. Easily the most noticeable change across the entire game is the fog, or lack thereof. This clearly affects the atmosphere of the game, as Silent Hill is supposed to be a town blanketed in fog, where you can't see 5 feet in front of you. It serves the purpose of making the town feel both more dreamlike and more terrifying all at once. When you take that away, you pull back the curtain just enough to make the game feel less like an engrossing horror experience and more like just a video game. Assets get shown during scenes that were never intended to be shown, breaking the illusion that something might be out there in the fog when you can see it's actually just a low-resolution texture of a roadway. There's nothing to be afraid of. This bleeds over into how players engage with the game as well. There's a lot less wondering on their part, where you're never unsure of what lies ahead because you can just see it. And if you can see it, you can run right by and avoid most confrontations in the town. In this version, you may never ask yourself if you should turn off the flashlight and try to sneak past a group of monsters that you only know are there because you can hear the crackle of the radio and the shuffle of their feet on the pavement. The next change the HD collection made was the removal of sound effects from certain scenes. For example, in the scene where James is descending the staircase of the Historical Society right next to Toluca Lake, a foghorn is supposed to sound. In the original version of the game, this was designed to unnerve the player, who at this point in the game should have just read about a steamboat which sank in Toluca Lake, killing 14 people on board. In the HD collection version of the game, this sound effect never plays, deconstructing an originally unsettling scene into one where James walks down a flight of stairs. Now, for the biggest change of all, one which I would go as far as to say ruins the entirety of Silent Hill 2 as is present in this collection. The Silent Hill Ranch sign at the beginning of the game had the font changed to Comic Sans. Point being, the HD collection alters the original version of Silent Hill 2 in ways that are genuinely detrimental to the overall experience, and shouldn't necessarily be the way you play the game for the first time. If you have the means to play a different version, I and many others in the Silent Hill community would advise you to do so. But at the end of the day, if that's all you have access to, turn on the old voice lines in the settings, ignore the Comic Sans, and play your heart out. At its core, it is still Silent Hill 2. When I first heard the rumors about a Silent Hill 2 remake, my initial reaction was, why? Beyond the obvious financial incentive for Konami to do this, I didn't see why any creative team assigned to the project would want to mess with the source material of this masterpiece. But after a while, I came around to the idea that a remake could be a good thing, introducing a whole new generation of people to a game and franchise that means so much to me. especially if the right people were in charge of the project. Then I heard Bloober Team were the people in charge, and have since lost almost any and all hope that the game will be done justice. People seem to either really love Bloober's games or really hate them. While I can't say I hate them implicitly, I do think they were absolutely the wrong people to give control over the Silent Hill 2 remake. So let's take a look at why that is. I have two main concerns with Bloober Team as developers in relation to how they may approach developing this remake, those being the gameplay loops of their previous titles in comparison to the loop that exists in the original Silent Hill 2, and their inability to successfully write about sensitive subject matters across the board. In regard to the gameplay present in their previous titles, we need to look at the difference between the subgenres of horror that Bloober Team's games fall into in comparison to Silent Hill 2, those being narrative-driven horror and survival horror respectively. Bloober Team's entire catalog of horror games are essentially haunted houses, where you travel in a straight line through the environment with pre-planned scares at set intervals, and the story is the only driving force moving the player forward. The only items you pick up are those that have significance to the story, and you can only go where the story allows you to go at any given time. There is no environment to quote-unquote explore in the traditional sense, which also largely removes the need for puzzles, as there isn't really anywhere to spread puzzle pieces across and allow the player to go find them and solve said puzzle. Everything that happens in these games, from Layers of Fear to Blair Witch and The Medium, only happens because the developers have crafted it to be that way. And there's not inherently an issue with that. It's a different category of horror games. These are not survival horror, whereas Silent Hill 2 is. It was released in an era where survival horror games were the most popular type of horror game on the market, and the gameplay reflects that. There is an ample amount of combat, areas to explore, items to collect, resources to manage, and puzzles to solve. While both Silent Hill 2 and Bloober's games exist under the same umbrella of horror games, they are certainly not the same type of horror game. So if Bloober Team effectively only develops narrative-driven horror games, one would hope that the narrative being told is worth playing the game for. While I'm not here to contest Bloober Team's ability to craft a structurally complete narrative, it's the contents of those narratives that continually fail to do anything interesting with their concepts, while simultaneously perpetuating objectively false stereotypes surrounding mental illness. First, I'd just like to tackle the idea that Bloober Team doesn't know how to take full creative advantage of the scenarios present in their games. I think that Bloober got better at this over time. Their more recent games do have a larger focus on building up the world, instead of getting tunnel vision and focusing solely on scaring the player in the aforementioned haunted house style. But the vast majority of their games lack substance outside of their immediate narrative. In my opinion, their best game is Observer by a long shot, simply because System Redux did a lot of heavy lifting to offer content that helped build up the idea of this cyberpunk world. Seeing how people live their ordinary lives by exploring this apartment complex, engaging with them both in the context of one person to another, and as an observer just doing their job. The very existence of observers begs so many questions about the kind of world we inhabit as the player when we first step into the shoes of Daniel Lazarski. And many of them get answered over the course of the game, while we go down the path of the main narrative and with the smaller side missions. Even The Medium offered a decent amount of content that helped the world building between notes, postcards, and memory shards. None of these were really required to complete the main story, but they were there for anyone interested enough to seek them out. In contrast to this, there is the Layers of Fear franchise, which are all essentially tortured artist simulators in which the artist suffers from mental illness, wanders around their haunted house location, whether it's an actual haunted house or a boat, and then credits roll. The story premise of each entry is painfully uninspired and uninteresting, to the point where I wouldn't want to know more about the world of each, even if Bloober Team actually put the effort into building it up. So Layers of Fear exists to this day as a virtual haunted house, which still could hold merit for some people, but it certainly doesn't with me, and it's the polar opposite of what Silent Hill is. Silent Hill isn't just some spooky town. It's a spooky town with history. It feels like a real place, and because of that, I'm more interested and engaged with the main story taking place there. but Bloober Team's titles very consistently feel like the world only exists because the game needs a setting. Now, I don't want to dedicate too long a portion of this video to dissecting Bloober Team's approach to sensitive subject matters and mental illness, but I felt that the conversation about them as the Silent Hill 2 remake developer would be incomplete without bringing this up. If you're interested in even longer deep dives into Bloober Team's failings in regard to writing on topics like SA, depression, and more, I'd encourage you to check out some of MertKayKay's videos, which will also be linked in the description below. To throw my hat into the ring and keep things relatively short, Bloober Team's narratives almost always center on characters who are suffering from a myriad of mental illnesses. The stories explore what led these characters to developing said mental illness, and by the end of the game, the main character typically reaches the conclusion that they are a burden to everyone around them, specifically due to their mental illness, and the only solution is to do something permanent. Unfortunately, I have to phrase it that way to post it here on YouTube, but I'm sure you understand what I mean. My issue isn't that the characters are doing something permanent at the end of the game. Silent Hill 2 even has an ending like that. But that's my point. It's not the only ending. Depending on your choices, you can get a number of endings where James lives, where he chooses to live, where the player chooses to live. Bloober Team has more interest in stonewalling players into their one and only ending that just happens to push the narrative that mentally ill people are a burden, which is not the case at all. Additionally, the reason that the characters in these games develop mental illnesses is usually that they are a victim of some sort of abuse, whether it be physical, psychological, sexual, or any mix of them. These are incredibly sensitive subject matters and need to be handled with the utmost care when writing about them. I'm not saying don't write about them. Bringing awareness through the art form of video games can be a good thing if done correctly. But as is so often the case in Bloober Team's games, they write their characters only defining traits to be their trauma. A harmful stereotype in and of itself. Couple that with the fact that Bloober's narratives will take it one step further and even sympathize with the abusers, and in the process attempt to make players do the same. To make us feel anything other than contempt for characters who have committed inhumane, unabsolvable acts against others. On all levels, Bloober Team is incapable of writing about these topics, and I consider their work disrespectful to both myself and the many other players I know who have struggled with them. Not only do these games insult anyone who has ever suffered from mental illness, but they couldn't even be interesting in the process. Bloober Team's games aren't outright bad on a mechanical level, despite how often the conversation about them skews things in that direction. They're functional. They are linear affairs without much room to mess up or misinterpret whatever the developers are signaling for a player to do at any given moment. They require player input, even if the input is usually just holding forward on the left stick, but they sure do move the player forward when you hold down the stick. There is a story to follow, and it has a complete structure of beginning, middle, and end. The writing that makes up those parts may be uninteresting and handle sensitive subject matters atrociously, but the story exists and is complete for better or worse. The visual presentation is on par with the rest of the industry, with textures being generally good looking and animations feeling smooth. Nothing is too out of place. The same could be said for sound design across all aspects of the audio experience. Nothing stands out as amazing, nor is it of a notably terrible quality. Bloober Team games exist, and they are things you can pay money for, and you can boot those games up and spend time going through them from start to finish, without suffering from anything that takes you too far out of the experience. Their work is, in terms of what makes a video game, fine, at the ceiling of their quality. But Silent Hill 2 deserves far more than that. It deserves to be handled with the love and care of a studio with a far higher pedigree than that of Bloober Team. A studio that has proven experience with the type of gameplay present in the original game, and can iterate on it in a positive way. One that knows how to handle sensitive subject matters with the grace and respect that not just the game, but the players deserve to be treated with. At the very least, I know that the original game still exists, and I can go back to play it whenever I want if Bloober Team fails to deliver in either or both of these aspects. But as far as I'm concerned, the only good thing to come out of Bloober Team since their inception is this clip right here.
I'll get it. I can't even fucking imagine why you would have to do this. I can't even process why you would have that. All right, we gotta go. We gotta move on. We gotta go. We have to move on. I can't do it anymore.
Silent Hill 2 is, without hyperbole, one of my favorite games of all time, and one of the most important for the art form as well. It's a sentiment that has been echoed far and wide since the game's release all those years ago, but it holds true to this day. I know for a fact that I wouldn't be here on YouTube had I not picked the game up at a tag sale back when I was a kid. I wouldn't have nearly the same appreciation for the medium of video games and their capacity to not only tell, but envelop players in some of the most hauntingly beautiful stories ever penned. And I wouldn't have found such a fantastic community to join among Silent Hill fans. People who are equally, if not more passionate than I am about this game and series as a whole. Many of them are far more talented and active than I am on here, so again, please check out all the people linked in the description and be welcoming to any new fans you may see here in the comments. At the start of this video, I said that the games industry has a hole in it, one that I believe can only be filled with a resurgence in the type of horror experiences that were released during the 6th generation of consoles. When the Silent Hill 2 remake finally releases, I sincerely hope I can take another look back on this video and say, there was a hole here. It's gone now.